Hi everyone, welcome to Unit 4 of Public Rhetoric and Practical Communication. This week we will be discussing appealing to audiences. For one of your major assignments this week, you will be conducting peer review of the personal statement assignment. This is part of the ongoing work you're doing in this class of serving as an audience for your peers. You've been doing that with your responses to Piazza posts, but this is your first chance to respond to a piece of your peers' longer writing. So I wanted to take a brief minute here to look at some of the responses you all left in Zaption about strategies for effective peer review. You all had some really insightful things to say about the process based both on your own experiences with past peer review as well as the discussions you've been having in your section based on the reading and lecture materials from prior weeks. Elisa writes that what the person doesn't know is what's going through my mind when I'm reading their piece, and that's probably the most constructive criticism there is, so that if they can understand the effect that they have, they can make changes in the way they want to achieve a different or desired effect. So what I really like about this idea is it presents the peer reviewer in the role of a reader, and that leaves it up to the writer to ascertain whether or not their writing is being received in the way they intended. And then based on that response of a reader, they can go ahead and keep going on the path they're on or change directions in order to achieve, as Elisa calls it, the desired effect. Ignatius writes, I plan to ask open-ended questions to further their thinking. This is another really good strategy to, again, responding as a reader. So what does this piece of writing bring to your mind? What does it make you wonder? Are there questions that it raises for you that you think should be answered or at least considered? Megan writes, trying to use more specific and descriptive feedback, staying away from general things such as awkward or fix. So as you, I'm sure, remember from Professor Losch's lectures on feedback, this is really something that research on composition pedagogy demonstrates, that the most effective feedback is specific and pinpointed and avoids ideas that are too vague to really respond to. So something like awkward. Well, what is awkward about it, right? What does that mean in this specific context? Or instead of saying something like fix, what exactly is the problem, and what are some specific ideas you have as a reader that you think would help address that problem? And then finally, John writes, rather than say, oh, you did a great job, I would say something like, I liked blank because of blank, so that they know how I feel and how they can respond to the feedback. So I really like John's comment because I think it gives a good strategy for delivering positive feedback. So positive feedback can be really important, but again, like more critical feedback, it needs to be specific. So it's not always helpful just to say, oh, this was good, I liked it. Right? Rather, as a writer, you want to know what was good about it. What exactly did the reader like? And that gives you a tool that you can apply to the rest of your writing and the revision process. If you know that a particular strategy or example you used was effective, you can then go ahead and try to do more things like that in your revision. As you're working on drafting and revising the personal statement, I wanted you to be thinking about some of these basic questions for engaging with publics. So the questions are, what is the message? This is a seemingly simple question, but it's a really important one for the personal statement because an unclear message can require a lot of decoding from your audience, and that's something you want to avoid, especially in a situation when you're asking for something from your audience, like you are in the personal statement. Who is behind the message? So this question can sometimes be murky, who's behind a message, right? And this can be in a literal sense if someone is writing anonymously, but it can also be who is behind the message in the sense of, yes, we know the name of the author, but we don't know much about the person or their credibility. The next question is, who is the audience for this message? So something you'll be learning about in this week's lectures is that audience can be tricky, and you also learned about this in the example of Alexi Vayner. Audience can be tricky with digital files because they can end up with unintended audiences. So you want to think about how to reach your audience, but also being prepared for the possibility that it reaches secondary audiences. And finally, what is the message intended to accomplish? So this is something you'll hear a lot about in the lectures this week. You'll be learning about speech act theory and what it means to really have a purpose with your public rhetoric. I wanted to look at some sample openings from personal statements this week, while we think about some of these questions for addressing public audiences. So the first idea, what is the message? One way to think about this is to consider it the controlling idea or thesis statement of your personal statement. So let's take a look at this sample. My intrinsic passion for fairness and order, coupled with my analytical and objective leadership ability, serve as constant reminders that I have been brought up to succeed at a high level in the field of law. Let's take a closer look at the language in this passage. So it opens with this writer's intrinsic passion, contrasted with their intrinsic passion for fairness and order, contrasted with analytical and objective leadership ability. So this opening has a lot of good things going on with it that we'll talk about. I would, before we get going, offer a bit of a caution against using the term passion too often in your personal statement. It can, in the genre of the personal statement, be read as a cliche. It's not to say it's a forbidden word, but if you are using it, you want to be sure in the body of the personal statement that you're really backing it up with concrete examples that demonstrate what you mean by the term in this context. So we do see here, though, the use of some terms that are especially relevant for the field of law. So things like fairness and order, which is important when you're someone who's dealing with a rule-based system, like someone practicing law does. Analytical and objective leadership ability, again, something important, and the analytical skill is important when you're dealing with reams and reams of case law. And the ability to succeed at a high level. So again, indicating someone who is able to exist in the competitive world of law. So these are ways of addressing qualities that are going to be important in the legal field. Here we have another example. Most, if not all, of the pressing environmental issues we face are extremely dynamic. They are dependent on many different variables, and there's usually not just a single defined solution. Therefore, leaders who can bring a dynamic, interdisciplinary approach will have the greatest chance to solve them in the most efficient way possible. I want to pursue a master's in environmental science and management with a specialization in coastal marine resources management at the Bren School, because I'm confident that I am one of those leaders. Let's take a closer look at the language in this passage. So while our first example opened with the qualities of the individual writer and then applied those to the field, this example opens with the field and moves on to the person's individual qualities. So we see, when we look at the language in this sample, there's a lot of energy used in the opening. So pressing, dynamic, interdisciplinary approach. I've put the term dynamic here in red just as, again, a bit of a warning that the student has used the word twice in a very short period of time. So even though this idea of shifting qualities, shifting resources, shifting approaches is important to the student's message, you want to be careful not to become too repetitive, especially in an opening of a personal statement. Still, what the student does well, again, is presenting a concrete and coherent message about an interdisciplinary approach that this student feels capable of bringing to the field of environmental science and resource management. So to go back to this idea of what is the message, our samples had complex messages with multiple parts, but strong controlling ideas that tie them together, which is something you're really going to want to pursue in your own personal statement. The question of who's behind the message is your chance to construct your own ethos. It's constructed through concrete details. And this is something we really focused on a lot in last week's lecture and the examples we looked at there with strategies for the personal statement. So I won't spend too much more time discussing it again this week. If you want to go back to that lecture and look at those examples, I'd encourage you to do that. But remember that you're constructing that ethos through the details and through the way the personal statement itself is organized. Who is the audience for the message? You want to research individual programs or institutions to which you're applying. Again, keeping in mind that the personal statement you're writing for this class can serve as a base document that you can then alter for different programs, scholarships, positions that you intend to use it for. But the best personal statements, when they're used out in the world, are adapted to specific audiences and programs and have some kind of demonstration that the writer is familiar with the program and has done some research and understands how they will fit in and what they will contribute to that specific context. And finally, what is the message intended to accomplish? So this is a really important theme in the lectures you'll be viewing this week. What you'll learn in those lectures is that changing someone's mind about something that's really big, researchers have found that this is difficult to do. When you want to do something with words, when you want to have an effective speech act, you need to be mindful of breaking the goal into achievable steps and parts. So that's something you want to keep in mind with the personal statement as well. So the purpose of the personal statement is to inform and persuade. You want to inform the audience about your experience, your research, work, extracurricular experience. And you also want to persuade them that you are the best candidate for that institution. The best personal statements will kind of combine those two purposes by using that informative stance in order to persuade. So it's not just purely descriptive, right? The description, the information is presented in such a way that it has a persuasive effect. So this is really getting back to that idea we discussed last week with specificity and relevance in that specificity. So you're choosing specific details that inform your reader about you as an individual, and those details are selected strategically in order to be as persuasive as possible. That's all I have for this week. Good luck with your drafting and revision, and as well with the peer review process. As always, I'm happy to read drafts or discuss peer review with you in my office hours. If I don't see you there, I'll see you on Piazza.